Welcome everyone to another BetTalker podcast. We got here today Michael Auer. Michael, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for the invitation. Hello, everybody. I hope this episode is interesting.
So, Michael, I mean, a lot of or most of the people, in safer gambling know you or should know you, but for those that maybe they're a bit new to the sort of
Mhm.
safer gambling thing, would you be able to introduce yourself and how did you end up working in this area?
Sure. So, I'm a psychologist and a statistician. So, I studied psychology and statistics at the University of Vienna. And I always thought that I'd ideally like to combine these two areas, of expertise. And before I worked with mobile phone companies, insurance companies, banks, so all companies which have a large B2C customer base. And it was always about understanding the consumer, like, okay, how do they behave based on the data that these companies have available. And of course they were mostly interested in retention, churn detection, churn prevention, cross-selling, upselling, that kind of stuff. And then I stumbled across an online casino here in Austria, and by chance got to work on a project with them, and it was about the same stuff, right? So the online casino that was in 2005 had, of course, massive amounts of data, and these data were to be analyzed and really from a marketing CRM point of view. And then also their G department, they used SPSS, and I was like very deep into SPSS and SAS and these psychological software programs, and I helped them. And then it got sort of, I got more and more involved into this RG space. And then I met Mike Griffiths at a conference here in Austria in 2009, I think. And he explained what he did, and I thought, hey, this sounds quite very interesting, and that's when it actually started. So like about 2009. And then I started researching. I started publishing papers, doing my PhD with him, and my specialty is in um, gambling research, facilitated by player tracking, by actual player data, like everything that you can do with data to gain deeper understanding in how players behave, how they set limits, if those limits work, whether you how you can identify somebody who might be at risk of problematic gambling. So everything that's based on lots of data and brings in the psychology of gambling. Do you think that was a good description?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic description, So I mean, it's a bit like a quite unusual background, in the sense, that all the data side and the psychology bit, and my experience, is that many other psychologists, sometimes they're a little bit, they don't want to touch gambling, they'll be like, oh,
Mm.
gambling, it's a bit. Uh, but wow, how did you end up creating Neccton?
Yeah, that Neccton was a consultancy company before, and we consulted, insurance companies, banks, and then also, of course, the online gambling companies. And then in 2000 and about 10, um, a company asked us actually develop a tool, identifying potentially problematic gambling. Reason was most likely that they were up for relicensing in that area, and that's what we then did, together with Mark Griffiths. So we developed this tool, Mentor, we called it back then. The Austrian lotteries licensed it. Then some Gausselmann, like, which is a German casino software, B2C and everything company, licensed it. And then it was very hard, for a very long time because nobody actually wanted to buy it. I mean, we had, like we went to the lotteries, their CEOs, their um, WLAEL presidents, no chance, like they didn't have, there were no requirements, so they didn't do it. So it took really until 2019, pretty
Wow.
much, when something significantly changed and more countries introduced mandatory player monitoring, risk detection, and then, of course, going beyond prevention. Requirements in their regulation. And back then, there was only one other tool, which was called PlayScan. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, yeah,
That was a Swedish tool, which was actually, I think Svenska Spel owned it
yeah,
back then.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember. I think were they the guys from Sustainable Interaction, the ones that they were working there before,
Yeah,
or
somehow
something? Some of them,
there
yeah.
was some sort of
So
yeah,
I
relation.
remember that you were the sort of OG, and it's so difficult, when you're the first one,
Yeah,
because at the beginning, nobody wants to help you, nobody's interested. The minute that things get traction, they're like mushrooms, like
yeah.
look
Mm,
like
mm,
companies, that they're similar, and they just
mm.
all come in. um, you always have been, because I have worked in the industry, as you know, and I always have been very fond of mentor, and you know something that was different is like, most of the company, you have a salesperson that tells you everything is possible, and when you ask, they
Mm.
don't know, and they have to
Yeah,
ask another person. But always with you, you were like in the presentations, and you knew everything about the product, and all the in and out. So it was always nice, to see you and speak with you, even if
yeah,
most of the time the companies say, well, at the end, is this a regulatory requirement? No, then we're not going
yeah.
to do it. Can we get it in house? And you get somebody, oh yeah, I can make a spreadsheet that does something similar. It's like, oh no.
Yeah, and that's still, I think, for these types of tools, whichever tool, whether it's Neccton or something else, the biggest competition is still in-house developments. And, the big ones, the really big ones, do it in-house. I mean, that as well, that it's very hard to crack them because I assume they want to be in control, they want to be in control what's happening, who might be assessed as high risk or something like that.
But I suppose that having an external tool, may give a bit more, I don't know, like, like an independent point of view. I mean, I know that, you know, sometimes, you get a bit like, from a commercial point of view, they compare tools to see, okay, which one is more maybe
Yeah.
advantageous for the company, rather than say, okay, let's just trust a third party tool that is supposed to do what
Yeah,
it's
and I
supposed
mean
to do.
it's also more, I'd say, sustainable at the now because let's say one of these, I mean, many online companies have a multi-jurisdictional strategy, right? So they
Mm.
have a brand in Spain, in the UK, etc., and the requirements are quite different with respect to this, specific aspect of player monitoring, customer interaction, and doing this in house is, I think, pretty challenging because, I mean, you have to adapt, you have to customize. A new regulation comes in, and of course, you're also kind of vulnerable, towards regulatory, inquiries, audits. So a third-party tool, in my opinion, makes sense. And we saw, or we're seeing what's happening, or well, it might happen in Spain when the regulator decided that they wanted to roll out their own algorithm to all of the licensed operators. And that
Mm.
would be really a first, kind of case. And it will be interesting whether other countries will follow.
Okay, that's a bit of a an interesting one for the country to run their like national algorithm or something like
Yeah.
that.
Did
Because
you hear about that?
I heard, I don't know if you mentioned it or something some time ago, but I thought it was an invitation to tender rather than
No, no. So what they did is, I mean, and I'm really surprised that this didn't make more waves so far, because what they did is they send out a document to the license holders which specifies in quite great detail their algorithm, right? It says, okay, these are the variables and they are complex, they're like, I don't know, the logarithm of the age or what, the last 4 months amount bet times three divided by five. So complex features,
mm,
variables. And the operators are supposed to compute like 80 or something variables.
okay, so the operators they need to build the algorithm to the specifications of the regulator.
Now the operator basically. So what the regulator says is, okay, here are the ingredients, right?
Mhm.
You need, so many grams of flour. You need strawberries, blah blah blah, and then you cook it for 10 minutes. So that's basically. So the regulator developed the algorithm, right? It's
Okay.
ready. It's a formula at the
Yeah.
end of the day, right? A formula based on player behavior, but it's not just like age times three, gender times one and stuff, but it's complex variables. So every operator has to compute these variables exactly as specified and then apply the weights as specified. And
Okay.
nobody will be able to do it because what's happening is if you're off just one decimal, right? If you compute it like wrongly a little bit, then your score goes sideways, goes this way, goes this way, goes up, goes down.
It sounds. I mean, following with the recipe, a recipe for disaster. Because I mean, there may be some that they may get it right, but I
Yeah, and they
think
must,
a few
the
ones may get
regulator
it wrong.
and the regulator has what. So what must have happened before? The regulator must have gone out and collected PGSI, that's what they said, from players, right? Real world players.
Mhm.
Then they got hold of these players data from the operators, one or more operators, or maybe the Spanish regulator has all of this data, I don't know, correlated it, and built an algorithm um, predicting self-reported problem gambling, just like I did it in three, academic publications. So you collect the problem gambling assessment, which is a PGSI, a BBGS, a SOX, whatever, you have the data, and then of course it sort of um, can, depending how you approach it. I mean, you look at last month gambling behavior, last 3 months, last year gambling behavior, whatever, and then you end up with a formula. Age times three, gender binary times whatever. Last month amount bet times whatever. Then maybe you split it up into sports betting and casino, or you go deeper into the roulette, wagers, slot wagers, I don't know what, number of deposits per day, average of deposit. You can compute hundreds, thousands of metrics at the end of the day.
Okay, but how do they know that they got the algorithm right?
Yeah, I mean, the algorithm, how do you know? So first, so that's a good point, So every algorithm, I mean, every supervised learning algorithm needs a target variable, right?
Mhm.
So if I don't know, wanna develop a blood screening instrument which predicts cancer, right? I need to have blood samples of patients who have cancer and who do not have cancer, right? Or if I wanna build an algorithm on relapse, treat patients in treatment, or whatever, drug addicts in treatment. I need to have know whether they relapsed or not, and then how did they perform in treatment before, right? So to be able for somebody in treatment to say, okay, you can go now because your profile looks stable, low chance of relapse, but you can't go, because if I apply the algorithm to your conditions now, your chance of relapse is 80%, right? But
Mm.
in order to do that, I always have to have, you call it in statistics or machine learning, pre-labeled data, right? The Tesla can only identify other cars because the algorithm was trained with millions of data, pictures, some cars, some not, some horses, some carriages, etc. So you always need pre-labeled data, right? Because you gotta know in your sample, okay, this is a good case, this is a bad case, or this is 0, this is 1. This is relapse, this is not relapse, this is cancer, this is not cancer, whatever you want to do. And likewise, if I want to build an algorithm that detects problem gambling, I first need to have a set of players, some of which are problem gamblers, some are not. As this is a psychological disorder, it's based on questionnaire. No other way to do it.
It's this. I mean, it's interesting, but I think I never have heard anything like that because I think that the regulator is taking too much responsibility. Normally regulators, or my experience is that they may tell you, okay, you need to have a tool that flags persons that are at risk, and then they can come, they can ask
Yeah,
you
yeah.
for the tool, and then okay, we don't think that this tool is good enough, or you need to make changes or something like that. But become them with the recipe, I think it's quite of a bold move.
But what do you think? I mean, what do you think made them go down that path?
I mean,
I
I
mean, there must
think
be a reason.
I think probably because maybe the algorithm that the companies in Spain have, was a bit too loose. Sometimes all these sort of things, regulatory wise, is okay. Do you have an algorithm? And maybe they had one, but oh yeah, if somebody makes more than 6 deposit in 1 hour, it's high velocity. Or if someone, you know, maybe they say, okay, look, this is a bit of a disaster. Let's, you know, tell them the recipe how to make a chocolate cake, because you get here a pancake, here you got.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, in Spain, the risk assessment has had and has a real business impact, right? Because they have various classifications. But if an individual is high risk, however you are sort of assessing this, they must not be advertised to them, must not give them bonuses and stuff. So we had a couple of situations when operators would want to manipulate our algorithm to determine their own risk score, and I always said we can't do that, because if everybody would simply alter the score, I mean, it would have no value at all. And maybe the regulator in Spain noticed, hey, operator A, out of their active players, 1% are high risk. This guy has no high risk players. This guy has 0.5%. This guy has 5%. What's going on here? You know what I mean? And that might have made
I
them to decide to force the algorithm on the license holders.
it's interesting because it's not the first time that you hear this sort of thing, even when testing different products. You may get one product and say, oh, like 2.3% of your customer base, you know are high risk. Oh,
Yeah,
this other provider said that 1% are high risk. Okay, let's
yeah,
go with the 1%. I suppose it's the same like with you know financial risk and all of that.
yeah,
Okay, you got this sort of thing. That's why I think having an independent
yeah. Exactly.
third
Yeah,
party.
yeah.
Okay, it's interesting, but look, so let's see. Sometimes you just have to have those things and learn from them. Hopefully, the data will be available and they'll keep working on it. But
Yeah,
that's
I'm not sure if they really will roll it out or if this was just, I don't think it's decided yet. But it looked pretty serious to me when they communicated this last year. And I mean, if you look at regulation, I mean, regulators approach this quite differently, right? So in Germany, if players, I mean, the standard case is that somebody can only deposit 1,000 euros a month across all of the licensed operators because they're all interconnected, which is also pretty. I mean, it's unique, right? Nowhere else in the world do you have that. And if they increase this limit for individuals up to 10,000 or 30,000 a month, then they have to monitor a number of criteria, like, okay, does the person, deposit frequently? Do they chase after their losses? Like really rules, rules. And if those are specific written down, right? Okay, this is the rule. I mean, there's still room for interpretation, but it's specific, And if, whatever a number of these rules apply, then they have to fall back to the 1,000 and they have to report this individual to the regulator. And then you have other jurisdictions like the UK where the requirements are not, specified in detail. So they have these customer interaction guidances, right? You have to identify monetary aspects, time-related aspects, so on. But they don't really, provide specifics, details or like a cookbook formula here. So I see, and that's interesting, because you have like Spain, if this comes, very specific, right? Germany is somewhere in the middle. The UK, very strict, right? Very strict in their, audits and stuff like that. But kind of, leaves it up to the operator how they are complying with the requirements.
Yeah, no, it's different approaches. What about the black market? Because with these sort of things, okay, if we have algorithms that may restrict, or inform the operator so they can take actions, or you have a regulator that says, okay, if you want more than gamble more than 1,000, then you need to provide details, and then the operator needs to decide. With the black market being so easily accessible, we just would this because the way I see is, okay, you need to somehow convince the players that this is on their best interest, but I think if this is not accompanied with the player understanding why you're doing this, and this is on the best interest, and they wanted to buy into it, then it's very difficult, because the fence to jump into the black market is very low.
Yeah, I mean, I just submitted a paper with Mark, which is very long, so most journals didn't accept it. Did you know there is like a maximum number of words?
I didn't know. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
It's like it's crazy. I mean, like we had to find something, which is completely. I mean, I wasn't aware. It's too long. It's too long. So what I did is there. So I, of course, I always knew, and everybody knows that the distribution of gambling intensity is very uneven across the player base. I mean, a very small or a small group of players generate the majority of the revenue, right? It's not equally distributed. In a lottery, it's quite equal, right? So you have millions of Spain, people in Spain, Austrians, whatever, English, British, and Swedish play the lottery, and they pretty much spend the same amount, weekly. So you have 50% of the customers spend about 50%, account for about 50% of the revenue. But especially in online in casino, you have, first of all, very few people in the population feel attracted to play casino in the first place, right? I mean, real casino. Then out of those, a few like it a lot. I mean, too much in reality. And if you look at, different countries and I compared like real world data from Germany, Netherlands, USA, Canada, England, Spain. And I was interested in this, inverse Lawrence curve, like Pareto chart,
Mhm.
like the 10% of the players in a given month who spend the most, how much are they accounting for? And the less regulation you have, of course, which is the case in the US and in Ontario compared to those European countries, the more extreme this distribution is. So the more extreme this small group of players can spend because there's no limit. So in the US, I found that 20% are accounting for 96% of the revenue.
Oh wow.
In the Netherlands, it was lowest with about 80% of the revenue or something like this. Still very top heavy, but flattened, because the Netherlands recently introduced maximum monthly limits, 700 and 300 euros, I think. In Germany, you have this limit that you can increase, but still in the UK, you have this £5 per spin limit. In Spain, you have the limits when you register, you receive a daily, weekly, monthly limit. You can increase it, but you have to prove whatever, go through a process. And in the US, there's basically no limit, right? You can do whatever you want. I mean, you can deposit millions, and I mean, you will pop up somewhere, but it's possible and it's actually happening. And why am I, sort of telling the story? Because you mentioned the black market. I think it's like a balloon. You squeeze a balloon and it will pop up elsewhere. And you have this group of individuals, and they will find a way to play. And the more regulation you have, like the tighter it becomes, of course, the more you're going to push out to the black market. And it's about finding a balance between regulation and you know desire to gamble.
It's really interesting. Do you mind if I ask you some questions about this study?
Yeah, sure, ask me.
Um, it's the data that you analyzed was from online casinos,
Yeah, sure. Mhm.
and for example, because I suppose that you don't have access to data of illegal,
No, not illegal, no, just
because it
yeah,
would
yeah,
be amazing.
regulated.
It would be amazing, if I mean, if any
I,
of those
I mean, I
Ill-
believe, I believe, that what we see in the regulated market is just the tip of the iceberg, right? This is, nice to have, this is like going with a street legal car, sticking to the limits, etc. But in the illegal market, and I mean, we all are, always surprised if we go to ICE and we see all of these, platforms. I mean, who are they actually servicing, right? Because I've never come across a brand that would require something like a mentor, because I don't know where they operate, to be honest. And the real stuff is happening there, because if there is no limit, people will play with no limit. That's a fact.
but that's why I was thinking, okay, so in, I don't know, in the Netherlands, okay, there's less people that play, you know on the top range, or
Yeah,
and like,
exactly.
yeah, probably because these people, they are in a Anjuan or a casino somewhere else, that they're not being asked anything. So okay,
Of
you
course.
may get some data, but the reality may be slightly different, because I think that, okay, probably, okay, there's difference between an American and a Dutch or a Spanish, but at the end of the day, probably we're all going to react similarly, or at least within the
Yeah.
groups that like casino.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and so a couple of weeks ago, Rob, I think I know how to pronounce his name, Hyrene. He's an English guy and he works in Australia with Sally
Okay.
Gainsbury, and he
Oh
published
yeah.
also a prediction paper, right? So they collected self-report, PGSI, correlated it, and one interest, and they also had the chance to ask players a couple of questions, and they actually found that players who said we play on multiple sites were more likely to be high risk, which makes sense. But it makes a lot of sense, because you just play more. I mean, you spend more if you spread your wagers across different sites. And we don't have any of this information usually, right? So when we run a study, it's based on the data from one operator. What would be interesting, I mean, let's say if you were able to connect somehow to player phones, or something like this, and you could see, hey, that's what they do here, that's what they do there, and stuff like that.
I think it could be really interesting if you could access, I don't know, like what you say, like the phone data. You can say, okay,
Yeah,
so if in casino X, they spend 3 hours of time and they
yeah,
spend this amount of money, and then they went to this other URL that,
yeah.
and they spend 6 hours. Okay, the likelihood is that they spend,
Mm.
this amount or more if you don't have a £5 spin limit or something like that. Would it be really interesting, but I find very difficult, to think that an illegal casino would like to cooperate in research, even if it could
We
be
have to
incredibly
launch your own casino to do it just for research reasons,
research purposes.
research purposes. Yeah, but no, I mean, I think that's at least my opinion. If you regulate too hard, it's gonna happen. And I mean, okay, I mean, you have all of these industry interests, which I have none of that. I mean, those interest groups, trade groups, etc. But I believe, like they say, that in some countries which have tightened regulation lately, the size of the black market is growing,
Mm.
and that's definitely. I think that's the case.
I mean, my experience, particularly working with BetBlocker, is that the amount of more and more casinos that you know spread like mushrooms that we have to block, is growing. And this is something that, look, is at the end, if there's no demand, there wouldn't be those casinos out there.
Yeah, exactly.
uh, I wanted to ask you, because probably you interact with a lot of safer gambling people, in
Yeah.
different
Mhm.
companies, different conference, uh, what sort of things, do you think that they would probably need to understand better players, because sometimes, okay,
Mhm.
you get like your few people that they read papers, and then the people that
Mhm.
a bit like scoff at it, like, oh well, I don't need to read a paper to know about the
Mhm.
customer because I'm dealing with them on a daily basis.
Mhm.
What sort of recommendation would you get to have a more all-round, safer gambling
Yeah,
stuff?
yes, it's a good point. I mean, it's been coming up again and again, right? In the past, can we do something about provide this information in an easy to access way? Because I mean, we also have to keep in mind not everybody working in safer gambling is academically trained or can read the paper, or is interested to read a paper. But I think it's there are different target groups out there. So the ones who are really in contact with players, they of course need, like, motivational training, communication, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
That's a different skill set. And the ones who are really tailoring or working on strategies, like, okay, what's because still every company can decide, okay, what's my strategy, what am I gonna do? I mean, am I gonna call players, email players, text players, at which point of time? What's this process gonna look like? How long are we gonna wait until they change behavior? Are we going to block them, suspend them, etc.? And I mean, that's another group that's probably something, which is more strategic, more analytical, and they need another training than the ones who are then running the phone call, and have to in real time guide the conversation, to the left or to the right.
Mm.
So, but I mean, are you aware of anything out there where where they could
I
use
I
this
don't know.
kind of information?
I always wanted to because I remember first time that I contacted Mark Griffith. I
Yeah,
asked
yeah.
him, I think, I mean, maybe it was 2014 or before, or 12. Say, oh, is there any like postgraduate training on safer
Yeah,
gambling,
yeah.
or something like that? There was nothing. And I remember back then there was only like the gam care training, that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
quite not great. I say, okay, I have seen the slides, and this is a bit,
Yeah.
I can train my staff better, than what is out there, and you see a lot of things, but they're all, sometimes a bit of a checkbox exercise most of the time, and people, they
Mm.
want to learn.
I mean, what's interesting is if you, I mean, you've been to a EASG conference a couple times, right? Peter Rima's
Mm.
conference, and it's happening, biannually. But still, given the amount of people we see at ICE, all those trade shows, and at these, very specific RG conferences, maybe 200, 300 people pop up. I mean, come on. I think it
It's
should be more. It should be
it
more. I mean,
100.
you have 60,000 at ICE. You have 300 tops at the most, at the only actually are completely RG dedicated conference, which is also only happening biannually. I mean, something is really terribly wrong, in my opinion.
I mean, my experience, because a lot of times I ask, or people ask me, oh, tell me when there's a good conference or something,
Yeah,
and you tell people, I say, oh, I love to go, but
yeah, yeah,
I got told that I can't go, or or I don't have the budget, or
yeah.
we need to man the safer gambling team. So it's a bit like, okay, if you sometimes you work in marketing or whatever, yeah, go take the company car,
Yes.
invite
Yeah, yeah,
everybody
yeah.
for drinks. If
Yeah.
you work for safer gambling, a bit more the Cinderella.
Yeah, because I mean that's also something I mean I don't have an answer for that, but very often, and we talked about this already about the problem gambling prediction, right? And what's the goal here? And in marketing it's easy. The goal is more customers, more money, longer player lifetime, maximum profit, which is okay, which is every business's goal, whether it's an insurance business, a bank, whether you are selling, I don't know what, guitars, or you're selling action figures. It doesn't matter. The goal is to make money. But in our case, what's actually the goal, here? What are we trying to attempt to do?
I mean, I think, going to the car analogy is like, okay, for people not to suffer harm, okay, even if you
Yes,
make a
yes,
Ferrari,
yes, yes,
and
yes,
you want to
yes.
go fast, okay, I want the people that they drive my Ferrari don't to,
To wreck
don't end up dead,
it.
or,
Exactly. Yeah,
and
yeah.
there's people that they say, okay, I don't want a
Yeah.
Ferrari because I don't trust myself. I better buy a Volvo, or I buy a,
Yes, yes. But how do you assess it? That's the question. What, because is there a way to do it based on the data, or do you have to go out, or do you have to develop like a questionnaire, like the positive play scale or something like this?
I think, this sort of thing could be measured at some level, about not, keeping your customers, for them not to churn, okay, you keep them in the Goldilocks zone, where they are enjoying your products, the company is sustainable. But what I see that sometimes, the gambling industry, it, many people in the gambling industry don't look at the medium or long term. Many people
Yeah,
that
yeah,
just
sure,
for,
yeah, yeah.
or
But,
it's next quarter, and it's it's very difficult to take care of people if you're looking at the next quarter.
exactly, and that's then what comes into play with the responsible and safer gambling, right? You send somebody there. How do you justify it? I mean, are they going to do a better job? Can they talk to more individuals? But at the end of the day, I think what's really missing is a metric or a number of metrics. Okay, this is what we are trying to achieve. So if somebody would be able to come up with some sort of health index, which also takes into account kind of the commercial aspects of the business, that would be a real win-win situation.
Next paper.
Yeah.
I have seen this sort of positive play, you know.
Yes, sure. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I feel a bit like I'm not sure about how I feel about it, because part of me feels a bit like, okay, so
Yeah. Positive plays a scale, right? It's about an attitude. Okay. You know, it's about, okay. It's a questionnaire. That's what positive plays.
uh, I also wanted to ask you, what do you think about prediction markets?
Um,
Is it gambling?
Well, I mean, it's not gambling, obviously, in terms of the monetary aspects, but I mean, it's risk taking, and I mean, was thinking about this a lot, because I think about writing a book, maybe in next year or in 2 years, and the title is gonna be "Why Do We Gamble?" Okay, and it at the core, of all of this is actually risk taking, and everybody takes risks every
Mhm.
day, but some people are just more prone to take risks, right? I mean, there were people before Vasco da Gama, Columbus. I mean, they sailed across the ocean, right? Others would have thought, I mean, are you completely nuts? You will fall off the earth. And you just have individuals who are more likely, they are more dopamine driven. I mean, yourself probably have friends or colleagues where you think, okay, this guy, you know he's just not a risk taker, right? He wants to play it safe, right? And this guy, he takes the risks. And then, I mean, it's just in the nature of man, and some people are more likely to do it and others are not. Maybe it's biological, maybe it's trained, it's learned. I don't know, but it's a legally, of course, you can say, okay, this is gambling, not gambling. But of course, in terms of the products, even stock market,
Mm.
of course, to some degree is gambling, because you have no way of actually predicting, foreseeing what's going to happen, but you are
I,
betting, wagering money on it.
I mean, I suppose it's a belief, but that, sometimes I think that, sometimes people that they take those risks, probably, I don't know that much of the history of Vasco da Gama, Magalhães, and all of that, even if I'm from that part
Yeah,
of the world, I think probably they will, okay, check maps from the Arabs, or check
yeah,
and they say, okay, look, I'm pretty convinced that you can go around the earth
yeah,
and find the in this, and probably they must have, it's not like, oh, I need dopamine, just
yeah,
jump down
yeah.
the cliff. So I think sometimes, this sort of trying to explain things, uh
That's another point, right? I mean, we humans, we are very much caught up in this cause and effect relationship
mm,
explanations, right? Randomness is something which bothers us because it doesn't make sense, and everything has to make sense. That's why, people in the ancient times looked at the stars, which were just, a bunch of random lights in the sky, and they connected them, astrologically, saying, okay, there is the great bear, here is this, here is this. They try to make sense of it, they try to find patterns in a random, collection of lights in the sky. So we want to find patterns. We want to see patterns, and everywhere, we can't help it. That's what we are built to do. That's what we needed to survive. Before, that's what animals need to survive out there. And gambling is, the one thing which does not make sense, and that's the interesting thing about it. It's completely random, and
mm,
we can't take it. And some people get really hooked up on it because it's just something probably which triggers them, which bothers them, which creates some sort of tension.
mm. Yeah, definitely, you get people that just explain them that, this product is a random number generator, and then they
Yeah,
still think like, okay, but the 33 have been,
exactly. Yeah,
or the
yeah.
30, 20, whatever. And like, okay,
Exactly, yeah.
sometimes when you explain, I don't know, like the gambler's fallacy and all of that,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
flip a
exactly.
coin 9 times and you get heads. What's going to go? Oh, tail, because, cannot be again. And it's okay,
Yeah, it's that's yeah, and some people, are more prone to this, like gamblers, fallacy, hot hand, whatever,
Mm,
and than the others. But we had a good conversation the other day with about the US, and there's this guy, and he wrote this book, Everybody Loses, I think it's called, about the online sports betting in the US, and he made a really good point, that the that you can't really compare it to Europe, because you have all of these college sports, where on which they also wager bet, and you have none of this here, right? I mean, there you have the college football, the college, I don't know, field track, this and that, and there's so much sports going on that we have none of this here. I mean, we have football,
mm.
and that's it, right? In Spain, what's popular? Football, right?
Yeah,
And
you have your
everything.
football, tennis, but
Yeah,
at the end of the day, okay, you have a few leagues, that they're
exactly. It
going to
comes
go
down to that. And they have so many sports. And when they introduce the online sports betting, of course, it takes off so much because there's so much product out there, and people are so used to this, to
Mm.
the games, going to the games, participating in the games. And we don't have this to that degree.
I was thinking, sometimes about, how, 'cause, I was talking with a friend this morning, about athletes that have problems with gambling and all that, and some recent scandals and all that. Then I just feel a bit like, sometimes they are portrayed, like, okay, and I just feel, they're just kids, that they,
Yeah,
probably they're lonely, they're being judged only by their performance, people, they want always, everything is very transactional,
yeah, sure.
and
Yeah,
the
could also be.
broken toys, things sometimes, okay, apart from getting into trouble, ruining their careers and all that, they
Yeah.
just feel a bit like, not much compassion there, feel a bit like, "Oh, okay, I don't know, what are your thoughts on, I mean, I know that maybe that type of psychology. What about, do you have any ideas about, treatment and how to support, young people?
In with respect to gambling, you mean?
Yeah.
I think, I mean, it might sound, very cliche, but I think education plays really a role. I mean, if you believe, I mean, I just, spent today writing up a chapter about adolescent gambling for something,
Mhm.
And if you look at, all of the systematic reviews, I mean, it's the parents, do they gamble, right? What's the attitude towards gambling? I mean, do you see this as a child? Okay, my parents are gambling. They have a positive attitude towards it. They might, whatever, your parents get excited, I'm betting on this team because I know, etc. Of course, you're gonna start gambling yourself. You know what I mean? If you learn it, to be like a sort of an activity that you could win money with knowledge, with sports betting and stuff like that. So education, and I mean, we know that adolescents, especially also with migration background, are more likely because there is much less education there, and they might be more likely to believe, okay, I can really win money. My friends, we all go to the betting shop. So that's really crucial. I mean, not saying somebody can't develop a gambling problem and they are highly educated and whatever, but the likelihood of developing a problem, if you are educated, about it, are less.
Mm. Do you think that we're getting the education right? Because I feel a bit like what we're having is a bit of a repeat of the 80s. You get and tell kids not to do something, or this is my.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue I think now is really with social media, phones, etc. And I mean, you have so much stuff out there, so many games, chance style games, that I think kids can't really tell the difference.
that's something that really concerns me. It's like, okay, like, okay, you may, the products that you're using, is gambling without money. And you,
Yeah.
you know okay, when it's eight or you're 18 now, there's a problem. But before, you have the pretty much the same products,
Mm.
maybe with a slightly different wrapper,
And that's
and
also what you see in those, systematic reviews, that gaming for fun is, something that, can lead to gambling problems if you're exposed to that.
but I think, it's mainly because, the games, they have gambling features, even if they're not.
Well, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, this entire, classification of games, this is a slot, this is an instant game, this is a e-game, is complete nonsense. Because ultimately there's a chance element, or let's say in casino games, there's 100% chance, right?
Mm,
Everything that might give you the impression of control is
it's
just an
fake.
illusion,
Yeah.
is fake, exactly. Yeah. I mean, what about, understanding a slot machine? I don't need to understand anything about it, right? I don't care. Or understanding a crash game like Aviator or something like this. I don't need to understand anything about it. It's all purely 100% chance. I can put a monkey here and press the button, or I can, develop whatever, a bot and press the button. So that's important. And but of course you can play around with this concept, because you can combine a scratch card, what know as a scratch card, and the slot, or comes up with something completely different, like, the crash type of games last couple of years.
Mm.
The topic is different, and that's, I think it's really interesting, from an commercial, from an, innovation point of view. But ultimately it's a chance game, and every chance game can be broken down into, certain mathematical features. How often can I play it, right? What's the event frequency? What's the volatility? What's the maximum bet that I can place, and so on and so forth.
I think I saw. I mean, I may be wrong, but I think I saw a paper from you that you
Yeah,
you, you were talking about that sometimes, like, systems that they're really complex, actually they're not that different from systems that they focus on more key variables, or
yeah, structural characteristics. Yeah, that's
yeah.
that's what you call it. But I got to a certain point, and what we saw, of course, that there are differences between, like, the game categories, because in a roulette you can just place a bet every minute, right? That's it. You can't speed up the event frequency, because that's how the roulette works. It spins around. In the slot, of course, you can do it very often, but it's very hard to tell differences between the slots, because mathematically they are so much the same. And then, I also talked to Simo,
Yeah,
before,
Simon.
and he said he tried to get more information about the games, but he failed, just like myself, because I thought, okay, I need, to know, I need of metadata about these games, right? So I need to know from, let's say, 50 slots. Okay, what's the topic? Is it about mermaids? Is it about knights? Is it about, I don't know, ships? Is it about planes? Can I collect something there? Is there some sort of bonus feature, free games, scatter, whatever? But then ultimately, if you really were serious about it, you would have to sit and play those games yourself and code them, which is nuts. It takes
Mm.
probably weeks to do it, and, some money. So if you maybe you get even addicted doing your own research.
It's funny because I remember, I don't know if you remember him, Professor Ryan Ali
Yeah.
from Bournemouth University. I remember, that, a long time ago, doing some research, sometimes you say, oh, I'm playing with fake money,
Mm.
and, sometimes I just, you know, I'm a professor and this, sometimes I forget, and I
Yeah,
just
yeah,
get,
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's
Carried
like, oh,
away. Yeah,
oh
yeah.
my God, I know that this, and it's, this sort of thing, sometimes, you get, I
But
also found some friends, that they were working like in product, with slots and all that, and they
yeah,
just have to try them and what you say, all of that, and then they it may be more
but your question
problematic.
is really
Mm,
important because I mean, I would say 99% of the research and all of the discussions that we have are about the person, you know, but very rarely it's about the product.
mm,
And the sort of the closest is maybe like stake limits, what they have in the UK and also in Germany,
mm,
where you can only bet a certain amount per, spin,
mm.
and autoplay stuff like that is forbidden. But it's very little actually. I mean, it's like saying, okay, I have whatever a drug, but I'm not interested how this drug actually works. What are the components in there? Can I make it safer somehow? I don't know. So more people can enjoy it. And it's like we don't talk about this. We just talk about the person using it and
Yeah,
how they
yeah.
can use it safely and whatever, or have fun with it, and that's no problem. But we don't talk about the actual thing that they are
It's
consuming.
it's interesting because I remember I was working in a company a long time ago, and we were going to the Brazilian market back then. And
Mhm.
what they found is that there was back then there was a lot of prejudice, like, oh, you go to a online casino, and they steal your money, and that's it, you lose your money really quick. And I think the solution that the company found is have games that people could play longer,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah. Tying on
so
device. Yeah, yeah, sure. It's interesting.
and
Yeah,
it was okay. People get a bit more fun, and then it builds a bit of trust, with those type of player.
yeah.
Ultimately, probably they wanted to, you know, profitability, but I suppose that what you're saying is interesting. Is okay. Can you make the play, engaging, to the level where you know, you minimize harm somehow.
Exactly. Yeah, because I mean, it's something which is not like directly harmful, right? I mean, we're not talking about consuming like a drug which no matter how much you take or what, it's harmful. It's not, what I mean. And so, but some people develop an issue with it. Some probably you can't really prevent it from happening because they would do it anyway, but for the majority, I believe you can. If you have a safer product, you have all of the RG things there, like the limits and so on and so forth. I mean, did you know, for example, that in the US, players don't have to set limits? I mean, even in the UK, right? You do not have to set a limit as a player, which in my opinion is crazy,
Mm.
right? I mean, it's so strict, and audits and fines and whatever. And then the individual does not have to set the limit. I mean, sorry, this is for me the minimum requirement here. When you register, you have to set the limit. And ideally, you have to set it in a way that it relates to your income or, your fund money, your available, funds.
I think making players reflect a little bit. It's
Exactly.
always
It's
going
all
to
about reflection.
be it's
Yes,
always going to be good. Okay, how much for how
exactly.
long do you want to play?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
Or how much money is the maximum that you want to spend?
Yeah.
You know, it's I think it's about being doing things more mindfully, but we're going in technology in a way that we're doing things more mindlessly. Okay, you watch Netflix, and before you know, the next episode is coming, and it's like,
Yeah,
okay, it's
exactly.
more effort to stop it than you
Yeah.
know
Mm.
and I think it's okay. Maybe it would be good if Netflix tell you, okay, you have watched 5 episodes. Okay, maybe you want to do something else.
Yeah, yeah, it's similar. Mm.
Michael, so we're coming to the our benchmark. I want to ask you a little thing, because
Mm.
I remember when we spoke in San Diego a few years ago, and you told me that
Yeah,
you have a big collections of cars.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite car? I suppose that maybe it's difficult, but what's
Yeah,
your...
very difficult. Yeah, very difficult. I think, I mean, it depends on my mood, you know.
Okay.
But I have, a Mustang 69 fastback. So I like that one. This is from the John Wick movie.
Oh, wow.
But and I also have like a 55 Packard. That was like a brand which went bankrupt in 58, but it's still there and it still drives.
Do you know about mechanics and all this? Do
No,
you fix it?
I'm just a
You
user.
just drive them.
Yeah, but I know when something's broke.
Okay, awesome. So, Michael, thanks a lot for your
Thanks, Pedro.
time, and I hope to see you around at the conference soon.
Sure.
Take care. Bye-bye.